and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show, Week 15 Recap Edition. I am your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great, depending on how your fantasy playoff matchups went. So, Dwayne, this was round one. Dwayne, the Rock McFarland, excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself here. But round one of the playoffs, Dwayne, you maybe laughed, you maybe cried, maybe a little bit of both. What a Sunday.
Yeah, it just went the way everyone expected, right? Saquon Barkley's carried you all this time, has a tough game, but if you've played fantasy football for long enough, that this is how this stuff goes. Any given Sunday, there's a reason for that saying, and it really is true. Any given Sunday, just weird stuff happens. So we have a ton to break down. So a lot of stars did live up, to their potential, but we did have quite a few duds this weekend, and we had some surprises as well. Guys we didn't expect to go off that did, but that's every Sunday in the NFL, Hartitz.
And accordingly, Mr. McFarland, let's start off with probably the most annoying game of the day. Pretty boring, actually, but let's start off with it anyway. Chiefs took down the Browns 21-7. Yes, they continue to get away with it. They did cover as 4.5-point faves. The under cashed here at 41.5. So look, for the Chiefs offense, we did get 2 touchdowns from Patrick Mahomes, 1 to Noah Gray, who don't look now, Dwayne, now unironically leads the Chiefs in receiving touchdowns. What a time to be alive. And then also had another one to, let's see who the freak was it? Juju Smith-Schuster, which, is great for everyone that wanted to start him. I do wonder, Dwayne, if the rush attempt to Xavier Worthy, which was on a little swing pass, I don't know, man, kind of look forward to me. Maybe there's going to be a stat correction incoming later in the week. Certainly could swing plenty of matchups. So again, pretty much base Chiefs performance, but obviously the big news happened at the end. Bad ankle injury for Mr. Mahomes.
Yeah, high ankle sprain. So we'll see what goes on with it. Didn't really have enough enough drives with Carson Wentz in any sort of situation where he felt like he had to push it to have any takeaways. I think when we look at what the Chiefs offense has been doing, I think you and I and probably everyone watching knows that honestly, it is Mahomes just getting them by. And if they can stay close in a game, he guts it out at the end, man, that's not going to happen with Carson Wentz. I guarantee you a lot of these games that the Chiefs have been winning are obviously going to turn into losses, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that. Everyone watching, listening to this show right now, or that listens to it in the future, they already know that. I think the key here, looking at the Chiefs, as far as fantasy takeaways for this weekend, Ian, is just looking at what happened with that Kareem Hunt / Isaiah Pacheco situation. We had seen 2 weeks where really Isaiah Pacheco had led the team, in rushing attempts. And it had gotten better after the first game to the second game. A little bit of regression here for Pacheco, 39% of the rushing attempts, which was dead even with Kareem Hunt, who also had 39% of the rushing attempts. And then we had Samaje Perine out there snapping those passing downs, as we've seen through much of the year. So even snap shares as well, 37% to Hunt, 37% to Pacheco, and then you had Perine at 25%. So a bit of a mess. And if you don't have Patrick Mahomes there to steady the ship, I mean, honestly, even with Mahomes, I'm not wanting really any of these guys in my lineups in the fantasy playoffs. It's a 3-way backfield, really 2-way, as far as the ground game is concerned. But man, if Perine's going to get some of the passing down work still, it's just a really gross situation, especially if Mahomes is out.
Can't blame the Chiefs real life at all. They're 13-1, division clinched, looking like they're going to have a great chance of course, getting the home field bye. And yeah, Kareem Hunt, even though he doesn't exactly have the same burst as he did in the past, one of the best, short yardage, just success rate, keeping, 3 yards in the cloud of dust. You need 5 yards, he'll still get you 3, doing that for you. And then Perine, again, doing his thing in the 2-minute drill. So unfortunate with Pacheco, answering a lot of start-sit questions this week, Dwayne. I think people were surprised at how often I was going away from Pacheco, but again, really tough to live with these 3 RB committees here in the year 2024. So going to be taking on the Texans next Saturday. Yes, we do have a couple Saturday games going on in week 16. And yeah, Dwayne, I mean, if we do have Carson Wentz under center, which hilarious, his first snap, he just dives headfirst into the linebacker. Let's maybe stop doing that, man. But if he is going to be out there, I mean, Travis Kelce is going to be, I don't know, tight end 7, tight end 8. He's not going to be the same sort of top 5 guy. We've already been struggling to get Hopkins and Worthy in there. I think it's going to be a lot of no's in these Chiefs start-sit questions.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's already been leaning that way. Obviously not for Kelce, but really with all these other players, we've been leaning more towards no for a couple of weeks now. Even on some of the borderline calls with Hopkins and Worthy, because we're now getting towards the playoffs, or we're now in the playoffs, for fantasy. So assuming a lot of you guys have got better rosters than having to deal with some of these guys anyway, but even in skank leagues, it has been tough to really navigate these waters. And just real quick on DeAndre Hopkins, man, 50% route participation again. So, I mean, just stuck in that situation where he's not getting enough playing time to really be able to depend on him in fantasy. Still gave you 8.6 fantasy points today. Target share or targets per route run, still good, 29%. He's been the best on the team in targets per route run for like the last 5 or 6 weeks. He just doesn't get enough playing time. And yes, if we have Carson Wentz out there, that's pushing him into the wide receiver 4 territory. He's been borderline wide receiver 3 with Mahomes, right? I mean, there are certain scenarios where you might be getting him in your lineup, but definitely not with Mr. Carson Wentz.
I want Mahomes to be fine. You want Mahomes to be fine. We all want the best quarterback alive to be fine. That said, Dwayne, if Carson Wentz somehow takes over and leads the Chiefs to a Super Bowl, would that not be the biggest example yet that we 100% live in a simulation? I mean, my God, man, you cannot write this stuff, or maybe the NFL is. All right, let's talk about the Browns now. Sadly, Jameis went full Jameis out there. Never go full Jameis. Just 146 yards and 3 interceptions. And all of them, man, were pretty much Jameis just tossing up ill-advised passes, 50-50 balls that his guys did not come down with. So also took 5 sacks out there. It was ugly, and accordingly, we did see Dorian Thompson-Robinson down the stretch. So, Dwayne, this was our initial fear when, this whole thing went down back in week 8. It was like, okay, it's going to be great while Jameis is under center. Can it actually last? And I think relative to our first guesses, it actually kind of lasted a bit longer than we expected. Please, can we get one more week? Because they got the Bengals coming up on Sunday, man. And that is the exact sort of fantasy-friendly shootout we need with Jameis. Because if it's DTR, man, similar to Chiefs, who do we trust?
Yeah, and even if we get Jameis now, it's just we know that he can be benched. Now, it was terrible today. He didn't have the touchdowns. Normally with Jameis, like, great, you throw 3 picks, but you also threw 3 touchdowns. He didn't have any touchdown passes today, so really a struggling game. And obviously you mentioned the sacks as well. So just a lot of drive-killing plays from Jameis. You can't blame the coaches, honestly, for benching him.
No.
So it does add some doubt, though. But the upside, to your point, yes, is there if Jameis starts, because we get a great matchup against the Bengals. Jerry Jeudy was out here doing his thing again, 95% route participation, hardly leaving the field, 6% target, 44% target share today for Jeudy. Man had 14 targets out there, 21.8 fantasy points. And to be honest, like after the first quarter, I thought it was going to be a bigger day than that. I think after the first quarter, it was like 5 for 51 already. So still had a really good day for you. You like him. Elijah Moore, one of those picks was a deep shot down the center of the field where the safety undercut it right at the end zone line to pick it off. That was going for Elijah Moore. He had some air yards for sure today. Didn't have the target share that we hoped for, though, whenever you have David Njoku out as well as Cedric Tillman. I mean, it was fine. It was at 19%, but we were hoping for a bump, right? We were hoping he'd be at like 25, 30%. Jeudy sitting at 30% as well. And we'd have this consolidated offense, but it was really just more Jerry Jeudy, not so much Elijah Moore today.
Shout out to Jeudy. Guys, players with 1,000 receiving yards this year: Jerry Jeudy, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb. How about them apples? So continuing to do good stuff there. And against the Bengals, I do think Jeudy, even with DTR under center, it's not like he would become completely unplayable. But again, don't think it's rocket science to suggest that, yeah, we want Jameis under center for these pass catchers. The other big news in Cleveland, though, Dwayne, is unfortunately Nick Chubb suffered a broken foot, presumably going to be missing the rest of the season. So, hey, now we do have a pretty large sample size up earlier this season with a Jerome Ford, Deontay Foreman backfield, and wasn't too pretty, Dwayne. I'm looking at the finishes right now, and Jerome Ford had an RB9 finish in week 1, RB18 in week 4. These were with Deshaun Watson under center. Obviously didn't have the high scoring ceiling going on as well, but I think we saw enough there to know that not exactly going to be a takeover situation. Good chance that Ford, honestly, maybe his role has even changed that much.
Yeah, I mean, it could be Jerome Ford plus Pierre Strong Jr. and Deontay Foreman.
Yeah.
Like we saw weeks where it was 3 of those guys. So we'd had the backfield consolidated down to 2 here recently. So maybe it'll stay that. Maybe it'll just be Foreman coming in and taking over the Nick Chubb role. It'll be hard to say exactly how it will go. I wish they would just feed Jerome Ford, though. Yeah. I mean, Jerome Ford looked pretty good, man. I know he didn't get that many touches every week, but every time he does, I'm like, looks pretty good. Has some juice. We saw him in, a couple of games last year where he got a larger workload. We were pretty excited about that. So, fingers crossed that they just let Jerome Ford run with this. I think, and no offense to Nick Chubb, but even before the foot, he was clearly the best running back on the team. So I wish they would just let him run with it. But to your point, it'll probably be some sort of committee that just really confuses us, that we can't understand on a week-to-week basis. But I would still say this is a slight bump up for Jerome Ford, because Nick Chubb, they were going to continue to get some sort of workload. I think there's a slim chance, though, that Jerome Ford now maybe gets to have like a 60-65% workload. To your point, we did not see that earlier in the season, though.
No. And one of these things where, again, with no more buys, as you guys may have heard, going to be tough for Jerome Ford to all of a sudden be this top 10, top 15 back. He is not the Zach Charbonnet sort of handcuff. Risky business saying that, Dwayne, as that game is about to start. Maybe he'll dud and completely disappoint everyone. But just looking at kind of where our ranks were this week, the Tyron Tracy's of the world, right in that RB2 borderline. I think that's probably where we end up kind of settling with Jerome Ford. So, again, has that big playability, electric 63-yard touchdown today, and had some big moments last year as well. But yeah, only so much you can do in an offense that does still want to keep multiple other guys involved. Let's move on to those Cincinnati Bengals. They took down the Tennessee Titans 37-27, covering as 5.5-point faves. The over did cash here at 46.5. So Joey Burrow, man, 271 and 3 more touchdowns through the air. Also had 3 turnovers, but man, with now 6 straight games with at least 250 passing yards and 3 touchdowns, tied with 2007 Tom Brady for the longest such streak in NFL history. Great day to beat, great there. And accordingly, Jamar Chase, 94 yards on 9 catches, and T. Higgins, hopefully he got you through the playoffs despite that disappointing week 14 finish, had 88 yards on 5 catches and a touchdown. That again just showed how strong this dude's hands are every time he has to make a snag through contact. So great stuff from the pass game as expected, Dwayne. Great stuff from Chase Brown again as well, 97 yards and a touchdown on the ground, and also 16 receiving yards in the touchdown. Even in a game where we had the Bengals up 10 points for virtually the entire second half, Khalil Herbert only had 1 touch. So pretty much business as usual, Dwayne. And that business is really fun for fantasy.
Yeah, nothing to add here, man. Start your Bengals. It's Chase Brown, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow. You love it.
Sam Hubbard.
The rest of the guys, don't worry about them. You're just playing those guys. But yeah, 96% of the team's rushing attempts, 92% snap share today for Chase Brown. That's as bell cow as bell cow gets.
Got to start Sam Hubbard now too, Dwayne, defensive end, making a touchdown catches.
He left the game though. He got hurt. He got knocked out of the game.
Now we can't.
Now
we can't. Dang, that sucks. Only other note would be, a bit of a sheesh here from the Bengals DST. Jordan Battle actually scooped and scored a fumble, but he did not score because he actually fumbled the ball while crossing the goal line. Not the only player to do that today. I have a feeling the other one pissed off quite a few more fantasy managers. So again, Bengals going to be facing the Browns. Hopefully Ohio December weather is cooperative because again, that is the exact sort of fantasy friendly shootout game script we are hoping for. And then we had the Titans who unfortunately, had to make a quarterback switch, and similar to the Browns, I do think it was warranted. Will Levis 3 interceptions out there and also lost a fumble. The pick 6 was the last straw. Had Mason Rudolph come in and look a hell of a lot better, Dwayne. For him to come in the second half, still find a way to throw for 209 yards and 2 touchdowns. I get it. It was the Bengals. I get it. The game script was in his favor. But again, that's pretty nice. And accordingly, we got to see, nobody really relevant actually put up numbers we hoped for. It was Tajay Spears and Chig Okonkwo, Dwayne. So unfortunate days, obviously, for Calvin Ridley. Nick Westbrook-Akini was not pretty to have a Titan in fantasy unless you happen to throw a Hail Mary up with Tajay Spears. Did we actually see, though, the backfield go Tajay's way, or was it a mix of Pollard being injured and, again, that blowout game script?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of those two things. Now, we have seen this a couple of times this year where they were giving more of the passing down work to Spears, and that's what happened today. He scored 27.2 PPR points out of nowhere, 55% of the snaps, 45% for Pollard. But if you look at it, only 15% of the rushing attempts. The rushing workload was still going to Pollard, but it was that work in the passing game. 69% route participation for Tajay Spears versus only 18% for Tony Pollard. 19% target share for Spears versus 0% for Mr. Pollard. So yeah, 27 fantasy points today for Spears, 8.5 for Tony Pollard. But I do think a lot of it came down to the game script. But it is a scenario where we don't really love the Titans. So if suddenly in these trailing game scripts, Tony Pollard's not going to get the passing down work, that would not be good at all for his role moving forward.
Titans do have the Colts next week, so maybe one of the few matchups where we don't have to immediately assume they're going to be trailing with it. Certainly, Tony Pollard will be one of the bigger guys to keep an eye on. He did come into this game with an ankle injury, and when he was briefly sidelined, it was also under that same ankle issue. So keep an eye on that. But yeah, good example, Dwayne. Love when this works out. We had the conversation with our guy Faraz here a couple Fridays ago about just how high the ceiling could be for Tajay Spears if he gets the opportunity. And even in a game where he was still just the 1B man, certainly made the most out of it. bit. So outscored Derrick Henry, Joe Mixon, and Chuba Hubbard combined, just like we all thought. So again, good stuff from Tajay Spears, and good stuff by Mason Rudolph for helping maybe get some desperate fantasy managers across the finish line there late. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the Commanders taking down the Saints 22-19. Shout out to New Orleans for covering at 7.5-point dogs. The under cash here of 44.5. So went for the win there at the end. We had a late, Foster Moreau touchdown. Unfortunately, Jawan Johnson could not corral the pass from Spencer Rattler. But we will start off with the victors, that being Jaden Daniels and the Commanders. 226 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. Also chipped in 66 rushing yards. Took 8 sacks. That's not ideal, Dwain. But hey, one of the biggest flaws in fantasy, in my humble opinion, is the fact that quarterback sack totals don't go against them. So we will not overly worry about that. Bigger, I guess, unfortunate thing here in Washington was Brian Robinson not exactly making the most out of what sure seemed like a featured role, Dwain. Again, didn't find the end zone. They get tackled at the 1-yard line at one point, but 21 carries, 65 yards, and also even 3 catches for 22 yards. Really seemed like Jerry McNichols and Chris Rodriguez were far more clear backups than what we've seen in past weeks.
Yeah, so I would say this is like really positive if you have Brian Robinson. Obviously, if you made it past this week, sometimes
small disclaimer.
These sort of performances happen even whenever you get the utilization. But he's gonna have a high really utilization score when the data comes in tomorrow. But 73% of the team snaps versus 28% for McNichols, 4% for Chris Rodriguez. Obviously, they have one of these offenses where they like to get both backs on the field together on some of the plays. 60% of the rushing attempts. Number 2 on the team was, obviously number 2 on the team was Jaden Daniels with 31%, but 6% to Jeremy McNichols, and a 56% route participation as well. So over the 50% line. Wasn't heavily targeted, but yeah, lots of opportunity here for Brian Robinson Jr. We won't have Austin Eckler back again next week, so I think we can look at him having another similar role. I know going into the bye, we had really not had a strong stretch of games where Brian Robinson Jr. had been completely healthy. He's dealt with a few different things along the way, but it does look like he got healthy through the bye, did have that full-time role, so should see better things as long as he continues to get a similar workload next week, which I think we will, because we saw it early in the year, even with Eckler. First 3 to 4 games before the injury happened, this is the kind of role that Robinson had.
Unfortunately, that game next week is going to come against the Eagles' stout front 7. That said, last time out, he still managed to find his way to 72 yards and a touchdown. So I get it. Not going to exactly be moving up into RB1 ranks like we might want to with that role, but still not someone we need to completely abandon, nor should we ever consider abandoning our guy, Terry McLaurin. 7 catches, 73 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 10 targets. Now has more touchdowns this year than he had in his last 2 years combined. Great day to be great there, Dwain. But what is wild is that Terry will also be gracing the cover of the Sheesh, not magazine, but, article that, goes on the interwebs and everything. But in addition to those plays, I kid you not, man, all 3 incompletions thrown his way could have been long touchdowns. There was a 53-yarder where Jaden Daniels overthrew it, a 62-yarder with busted coverage where it sure seemed like the ball was on enough fingertips, man, to reasonably be caught. And then shortly after that, there was another 45-yarder that was just a bit underthrown. So the last 2 were on the same drive. Not saying he could have had 5 touchdowns out there, but seriously could have been a 4-touchdown masterpiece from Terry. But again, we'll take the wide receiver 1 finish anyway out there. So otherwise, Dwain, my last, just concern here would be Zach Ertz, number 2 target. Couldn't quite come through for you in the sicko start streets, but looked like he was on his way to. Made a sick one-handed catch in the red zone, but unfortunately suffered a concussion and got knocked out after that. So did we see rookie Ben Sinnott actually get the full-time role, or was, I believe his name is John Bates, kind of make things a bit murky?
Sinnott was definitely in the lead. He had a 53% route participation versus only 22 for John Bates. Now, he didn't do a lot with it. He only had a 3% target share on the day, and he's not been targeted very often at all this year whenever he's been on the field. So it's hard to get overly excited about Sinnott if you're playing in a complete skank league, where you playing an Ian's 32 teamer and you made the playoffs, so maybe Ben Sinnott will be an option. But definitely if we have a game without Ertz, I'm interested in seeing like if he can do anything. But man, he'd be really tough to trust in fantasy lineups, even if we thought he was going to get 60, 70% of the work.
Was there a wide receiver that kind of took over with Noah Brown presumably out?
Dimey Brown was the guy that stepped in when Noah Brown out. He took on that wide receiver 2 role. He had an 82% route participation. Wasn't very, heavily involved either. This was mostly Terry McLaurin today with a 32% target share, but 13%. Second on the team was Dimey Brown. Now, he is a guy we know can make those big plays down the field. Interestingly, in this game, that's not how they used him. He had an average depth of target of only 1. So he was used more around the line of scrimmage. So we'll see what happens with his role, but it was him working as the wide receiver 2. And then it was Olamide Zaccheaus was working as the wide receiver 3. He had a 49% route participation, and he had a 13% target share as well.
Zaccheaus also did have a short touchdown nullified, but Terry McLaurin ended up, capping off the drive instead, which I'm sure the vast majority of people out there outside of the Zaccheaus family appreciated. So Dimey, again, not going to be someone we're actually going to actively trust in the wide receiver 3 or even 4 ranks like that. But hey, maybe you DFSers out there, or as Dwain loves to say, skank leaguers among us, could get down with some Dimey Brown. Otherwise, with the Saints, Jake Haener, another quarterback who was benched after a very bad performance, had Spencer Rattler come in after halftime and not exactly do much better. But you know what? When MVS is unironically your number 1 wide receiver, what can we really expect out here? So duds all around, except for Alvin Kamara. Yeah, only 12 rushing yards, but did catch a touchdown. Also had 58 yards receiving. So one cool stat before we get into Kamara, because yes, he did suffer a groin injury. That touchdown was not thrown by a quarterback. It was actually thrown by Cedric Wilson, who Cowboys fans will remember somewhat fondly as someone who is awfully good on these trick plays. And now for his career, Dwain, Cedric Wilson is 6 for 6 for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. So not saying move over Mohamed Sanu yet, but man, Cedric Wilson, man, let's throw the football around. This guy is good at it. But again, getting to that much more fantasy relevant injury here, Kamara did suffer a groin issue. And man, Dwain, if he is going to be missing time, going to be hard not to get excited about Kendre Miller.
Yeah, I mean, Kendre is going to get the role, but I don't think it's going to be too hard to not get excited just because, man, this Saints offense is terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, these quarterbacks are a complete mess. But it will be Kendre Miller time. 56% of the rushing attempts today, 47% of the snaps. Once we had Alvin Kamara out of the game, it was almost all Kendre Miller. It was very little. Jamal Williams ended up with only 8% of the snaps today, despite an injury to Alvin Kamara.
I was checking to see if he was on IR or something because he didn't even get a carry.
So, I mean, I'm thinking Kendre Miller, whenever I do the projections for next week, because it's always tricky on these 1-game samples, like, I'll have to definitely step in and manually take over. I mean, I'm at least putting him at 50 to 55% if we don't think that Kamara is going to go, but it could be more like 65, 70%. Now, again, how good will this Saints offense be? I think that's going to be the big question mark, but yeah, I do think this will be Kendre Miller's backfield.
Hey, man, the amount of start-sit questions I got with, Sincere McCormick this week, I'm pretty sure Kendre Miller still has some teams out there that could use his services. But to your point, next Monday night in Lambeau, certainly not going to be a spot where, signing up for with too much encouragement. But Raiders in week 17 in the Superdome, so maybe Kendre could get things going then. Again, going to be someone on the cover of a lot of waiver wire magazines. And hey, at this point in the year, you can find someone projected for
You're churning out some magazines tonight. I love it. Like, God, you're writing your ass off.
I don't even read magazines. What the hell, Dwain? Kendre Miller, feeling good there. And also feeling good about our friends over at New Era. Shout out Dolphins. I just like this hat. I'm going to stop making up reasons for why I wear it all the time. But shout out New Era. And you guys can stand for change with New Era Cap, the official cap of the NFL. The Inspired Change collection is part of their commitment with the NFL to break barriers and create opportunities in communities of color. With black team logos set against official team color crowns and finished with the first ever on-field pin, this collection is for the change makers. Join the movement with the official cap of the NFL, available now at New Era Cap. Note that the NFL does not profit from the sale of Inspired Change products. Charitable contributions are awarded by the NFL Foundation directly to NFL's Inspired Change nonprofit partners. For more information, please visit www.nfl.com/inspiredchange. Talk about Lamar Jackson, a.k.a. La MVP. Maybe there's a couple good candidates this year. And the Ravens taking down the Giants 35-14. Baltimore covered that huge 16.5 spread, and the over did cash here at 43.5. So, yeah, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, 5 passing touchdowns from Lamar, Dwain. And only one of them was even a dump off. So yeah, Justice.
They were dimes, dude. Dimes in the back of the end zone to Bateman and Aguilar. I mean, the throw to Mark Andrews Andrews down the seam. I mean, these are amazing throws
Yeah.
from Lamar Jackson. Pinpoint placement.
Just incredible. Again, maybe there's been some games this year Ravens do a good job scheming guys, or the defense is biting too heavily on play action, but these were truly all awesome. So you mentioned Bateman only had 5 targets, but caught 3 of them for 80 yards and 2 scores. Honestly, he had another one where he was maybe a better ball away from getting a third. So continuing to prove that, I think we've kind of seen it in Baltimore, some of the Hollywood Brown years, and even Zay Flowers, based on, I think, what you and me, Dwayne, think he could be capable of in a different offense. Just not the most wide receiver friendly group, but hey, they're so good in real life. Why would they go ahead and change all this? So Mark Andrews did score another touchdown. He now has 8 since week 6, most among all tight ends. I'm sure many of you, unfortunately cut him right before that happened. So just know that you personally are the reason why Mark Andrews got going. But Dwayne, again, great stuff from the passing game. Unfortunately, Zay Flowers, bit of a dud, just 53 scoreless yards, caught 6 or 7 targets. But as we know, that can just be life in the Ravens offense. So more of a maybe low-end wide receiver 2 as opposed to wide receiver 1. We know in our hearts he can be. But the real big news was, 35 points, well over 400 yards of offense, and just 6.7 fantasy points from Mr. Derrick Henry.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's really not a lot to say here about the Ravens. This is just an unlucky game script for Derrick Henry. We really thought that, he would start getting the ball early in the game and they would just keep on giving it to him. But for whatever reason, the Ravens just decided that throwing the ball was going to be the best way to beat the Giants. And maybe they felt that they needed to work on their passing game. And this would be like a practice against air where they could just throw the ball, to all their wide receivers for touchdowns all game, get Lamar going, maybe get the hype going for the MVP. I don't know. I don't know the reasons. You can beat the Giants any way you want, but they've given up some of the most rushing yards in the league. So I know Derrick Henry could have had a better day. It just didn't work out today. And unfortunately for some of you, it came at a really bad time. 6.7 fantasy points, as you said, Ian. The only thing I would hit on real quickly is like a guy like Zay Flowers, is really interesting because we've seen so many games this year where Lamar can throw for, 300 yards, and Zay's still out here with a 29% target share. In most, runouts, you would think if you have an offense that's passing this well and you have a wide receiver leading the team in target share like he does pretty much every single week, you would expect more in fantasy. So I feel like he's due. I feel like Zay Flowers is due for a big game, but to your point, it hasn't quite been there, especially here in the last several games, right? Early in the year, we did get some of those games. The only other note I would bring up is Mark Andrews, 83% route participation. Can't say that's going to stick. Can't say it means anything because we've seen this a few times this year. And then all of a sudden it just goes back down to 60%. So Isaiah Likely was the second man up with a 59% route participation. So we'll see. Maybe they let Mark Andrews finally play a full-time role. If they do, he would be borderline high-end wide receiver, borderline high-end tight end 1, because this passing game is so much better than what it's been in the past.
And again, man, it really is wild. Second in passing touchdowns, 4th in passing yards is Lamar Jackson this season. The offense as a whole is number 1 in passer rating. And, they can run the absolute hell out of the football as well. So didn't need King Henry in this one. I know it's been disappointing. 28 days and counting, Dwayne, since King Henry has, found the end zone. So I would expect bigger days ahead. But, always sucks to see one of these smash spots.
It is a reminder, though. He still is, as much as we love him, and we've been saying it for a few weeks now, he is still a game script back.
Yeah.
If they go and today it wasn't because they were losing, they were blowing the Giants out, but for whatever reason, they decided their plan of attack was going to be through the passing game. And in those games, whether it's script related or whether it's just due to the game plan they come up with, these sort of outings can happen to Derrick Henry. We saw it for years in Tennessee. It still holds true here in Baltimore.
If he doesn't get the, 50-yard house call, it's going to be a bit of a dud in the box score. And again, it's similar to, we'll have plenty of time to talk about Saquon as well. But we see glimmers of, kind of the concerns we had. Obviously, they were overblown. Obviously, we all should have drafted a lot more of Henry and Saquon. But again, instances like this maybe go to show you not to completely reverse track in the future. But, plenty of time to worry about that. So over with the New York Football Giants, Tommy DeVito also got benched at halftime. However, this one was not for performance. He actually had a concussion, so get better soon, Tommy. Got to see Tim Boyle in between, though, Dwayne. I do appreciate Timmy Boyle, man, from preseason to some of the backup, week 18 games over the years. This is a backup quarterback who, more in the Drew Lock family tree of just willing to really air the ball out and, live with the consequences, not just going to go down and, a slew of checkdowns like some of these other guys out there. So started getting Malik Neighbors the ball and got Malik Neighbors his first touchdown since week 3. So 10 catches, 82 yards, and a score on 14 13 targets. And it's a good thing he did, Dwain, because seeing all the Devin Singletary out there too, especially near the goal line, I mean, it really is Malik Neighbors and everyone else in this offense.
Yeah, Neighbors had another great game. Like, he's been getting the targets all year. Obviously, came through, gave you that was a sweet touchdown.
Yeah,
in the end zone, where he turns back to catch it as he's falling down, towards the pylon. That was a really good catch. But on Tyrone Tracy, I was more worried about it when I was watching the game, like you were. Once I got in and looked at the utilization, I was like, great. It was a dud game for Tyrone Tracy, which I had him. We had him move down the ranks. It was a tough matchup against the Ravens. The Giants. I think their team total was 2. From Vegas. I know it wasn't that bad, but it was really bad. But Tyrone Tracy, 4.5 fantasy points. He was a dud, but man, still at 67% of the snaps, 53% of the rushing attempts. He had a carry inside the 5, just like Devin Singletary had a carry inside the 5. 45% route participation versus 22% for Devin Singletary. So still really in a very similar role to what we've seen him in over the last 3 to 4 games. He just had a stinker. It just really sucked. So, we've seen him in 3 out of the last 4 games. He hasn't been like the dominant ball carrier. He's been dominating snaps, gets more of the passing down work, then usually gets like 55% of the rushing attempts. He was still in that same range. So really Tyrone Tracy, same player, just didn't have a great game. Tough matchup. Devin Singletary made it seem more obvious because he did come through with 13.1 fantasy points. So you notice him when you see him on the screen, especially when you're watching Red Zone for a lot of the day like I do.
Tracy had 4 straight top 20 finishes going into this one. I understand he's not going to extend that streak today, but hey, man, they do get the Falcons here in week 16, excuse me. So again, the fact that utilization is on the right side, we're going to take a page out of Dwain's book and not overreact too much to what just happened. And again, trust the process here moving forward. So otherwise, yeah, feeling good about Malik Neighbors, just getting double-digit targets, whoever is under center. And other than that, I think we can move on to the Cowboys taking down the Panthers. Dwain covered as 2.5-point dogs. Obviously, they won outright. Over did cash here at 41 as well. They could be on a 4-game win streak if the punt team just yelled Peter a little bit louder and didn't freaking Leon let that one against the Bengals. So I know we can go through almost every NFL game and find a moment or a bounce or two where that is the case. But I will give Mike McCarthy some credit, man. It's looked like this team was headed towards a 3-14 finish and just rolling over. But McCarthy, Micah Parsons, CeeDee Lamb, all these leaders on the team really have kept on keeping on, whatever. So good stuff there. They get the Buccaneers next week on Sunday Night Football. Maybe they can keep the good times going because at least in fantasy, Dwain, it's pretty simple now. We have Rico Dowdle getting 20+ touches a game, and that's keeping him right there in the mid-tier RB2 conversation. And CeeDee Lamb, despite having Cooper Rush under center, is getting fed, and he's making plays with it. $116 and a touchdown today. So loving Rico, loving CeeDee. Love it.
Yeah, I mean, and we've talked about Lamb, like he's still going to come out as like a low-end wide receiver 1, but even though it's 195, 188, 219 yards over the last 3 games for Cooper Rush, to your point, a lot of the targets are still going to Lamb. It's not the same as it was with Dak Prescott, where you're getting a high-end wide receiver 1 every week, but you got a shot of scoring like 18 to 22 fantasy points. He gave you 26 in this one. This was one of his best games that he's had with Cooper Rush under center. So yeah, CeeDee Lamb looking good, 46% target share today. The only other guy I would call out here, Brandon Cooks did play a full-time role, 97% route participation for him, 18% target share. So maybe a cheap kind of punt play next week in DFS. Brandon Cooks, not the player he once was. He's a guy that we talked about early in the actually in the offseason. Him and Tyler Lockett were 2 of the big older players that had really deteriorated against man coverage, and that's really lived up to I don't want to say lived down to expectations, as this season has played out. But man, if you have a guy getting, 90% route participation, and he's probably going to be priced really low in DFS, and you have a matchup that doesn't look that looks pretty good, actually. Like I can see Brandon Cooks coming through with a touchdown next week. So that's just a name to keep in mind. The only other one, Jake Ferguson, is back healthy now. 86% route participation for him. It was a fantasy dud with 4.3 fantasy points. He did have a 14% target share.
Did have a nice little 19-yard game where he showed off some of that yak, and it just made me write a quick note, Dwayne, like, don't forget about Jake Ferguson next year when we get Dak under center, because I do maintain he is, one of these actually good in real life tight ends as well, in addition to obviously some of the success he has had in fantasy land. So good call out with Cooks. They are going to have the Buccaneers next week, so I do think that would qualify as a, potential matchup that the passing game could again flourish. Today it was Jalen Tolbert and Jalen Brooks who had touchdowns. So I will give Cooper Rush some credit because I know I've thrown him under the bus a few times here on the Fantasy Life show. The 17-yarder Jalen Brooks in particular, man, one of his best passes out there. And as much as I do feel like every second or third ball that he throws is almost intercepted, at the end of the day, they don't rack up too much. And he didn't have any out there today. Did lose a fumble on a read option. That seemed like it was 100% his fault. But hey, 30-14 win. Good job by you, Mr. Rush. Not so good of a job for Bryce Young and the Panthers. You know, the offensive line didn't help. Micah Parsons breathing down his neck all game long. Ended up taking 6 sacks. But man, 2 fumbles and then an interception. Not one, actually 2 interceptions. One of which was a deep ball to Adam Thielen. That sure seemed like had a chance if he could have put a bit more air under it. So probably we're due for one of these sort of performances, Dwayne.
Yeah, and it hurt the passing game for Adam Thielen. I mean, he still was doing his thing, Ian. He had a 26% target share, 89% route participation, but only gave you 10.1 fantasy points today. It was Jalen Coker that came through with the 21 fantasy points thanks to a busted coverage that led to a long touchdown. What was that? 83-yard receiving touchdown for Jalen Coker. So most of it did come on that one play, but he was second on the team in target share at 22%. We did have Xavier Legette leave the game with an injury. David Moore also saw a smaller role with only a 65% route participation because at first I was just wondering, okay, Coker was second on the team in route participation at 84%. Was that all due to just Legette getting hurt? No, he actually saw more playing time than David Moore as well. So I'm guessing we'll see Thielen and Coker as the primary 2 guys if we don't have Xavier Legette ready for next weekend.
Wouldn't be surprised if they just shut down Legette at this point because they also came out and said he's going to need hand or wrist surgery, I think it was. So that in addition to the groin sucks. So he did flash as a rookie a little bit, you know, to score as many touchdowns as he did in this offense. Takes a certain amount of skill. Did have even a cool little reverse today. Broke a couple tackles before it leaving. So yeah, you mentioned the 83-yard house call. Shout out all you Coke heads out there. We at least got one, but yeah, it was definitely blown coverage. Wouldn't exactly anticipate that being the norm moving forward. So Panthers are going to take on the Cardinals next week, Dwayne. And again, we'll be back to Thielen. I probably got a little overzealous ranking him wide receiver 15, whatever I had out there, but still think it's going to be tough to drop him outside the top 30. And we will be going back to well with Chuba Hubbard, even if today he didn't have the production.
Yeah, Chuba only gave you 8.9 fantasy points today in a PPR, but the only other number you need to know is snap share, 94%. Ooh. I'll just stop there. He's not leaving the field.
I thought for a second you might actually start with the 100, but, 94%. Can't be choosers there. So good stuff all around there. Let's move on to another, good performance, I guess. The New York Football Jets took down the Jaguars 32-25. Jets did cover as 3.5-point faves. The overcast here at 41.5. So Aaron Rodgers, he's had, it was some silly stat, like he was 0 for 5 or something in potential game-winning situations. Well, he finally got one here. Threw a beautiful pass to Davante Adams down the seam, got them all the way down the 1-yard line where Breece Hall punched them with just about a minute left to go ahead and clinch that victory. So Davante Adams wound up with 9 catches, 198 yards, and 2 touchdowns on 12 targets, and every single bit of that production came in the second half, Dwayne. So good explosion there. Meanwhile, we also saw Garrett Wilson catch 3 of 6 targets for 56 yards and a touchdown. We'll say the score, left pretty wide open against zone coverage, but hey, those things tend to happen when you have 2 great wide receivers on the football field. So Rodgers, 289 and 3 scores through the air, even led the team with 45 rushing yards. I mean, again, we've seen enough bad performances to know this was a spike, and yes, it also came against probably the single worst pass defense in football. But hey, man, good to see some great players, even if some of their great days are behind them. Make some great plays out there.
Yeah, I mean, Davante Adams was due for a big game. I mean, he'd given you some big games, but I mean, just with his target shares and everything that he's done since he joined the team, it's been pretty amazing. Today, he had a 43% target share on his way to 42.8 fantasy points with 198 yards receiving on 9 catches, also 2 touchdowns. The one thing I would just say here, as far as I'm not sure there's a takeaway here because Breece Hall was entering this game with an injury. So that's obviously part of what we're seeing. We also saw Braylon Allen leave this game with an injury. But even with that, we saw Breece Hall with a 48% snap share, 41% of the rushing attempts. It was Isaiah Davis with 39% of the snaps and 23% of the team's rushing attempts. You mentioned Aaron Rodgers was actually the leading rusher on the team. He had 6 rushing attempts today. That was a season high, 23% of the team's rushing attempts. So Breece Hall probably in more of a committee moving forward, just playing through an injury. I'm not sure they're going to want to feed him, but as soon as I say that, Ian, this is the team that last year, I know you'll bring it up. They fed him in a very meaningless game. One of their young players that was coming off of an injury the year before, and they decided to just feed him. So we could see Breece Hall back in that role, but I kind of feel like Isaiah Davis, Braylon Allen, and we'll see what the deal is here with Braylon Allen, but feels like they're probably going to have a little bit more of a committee moving forward. I won't be giving Breece like a 65-70% rushing attempt share going into next week like we were early on in the season. I just don't think I'm not saying it can't happen. I just don't think you can project it that way.
Going to have a winnable enough matchup, though, against the Rams, who, again, did look good on Thursday against the 49ers, but we've seen a good amount of them this year. And I still think, Dwayne, we had Breece, around like RB21, RB22 territory today. Maybe we do drop him a few spots, but again, when
he saved his day really with a late touchdown. I mean, he only scored 13.1 points. I say only, but I mean, when you score 13.1 and half of it is your touchdown, I mean, again, that just tells you how volatile Breece really is.
Yeah, this one didn't crack my quad box. So I was just forced to see some of the highlights on red zone. So again, can't exactly sit here and say Breece Hall looked amazing, but just in terms of yards after contact numbers, just 1 yard, which is fairly bad. But then again, the New York Jets have been one of the worst offenses all year long in terms of yards before contact per carry, and not like we see again Isaiah Davis or Braylon Allen making too much more out of their opportunities. So not looking great down the stretch for Breece Hall, but at least for 1 week, the Jets got that W. So last point, Dwayne, I forgot Jeremy Ruckert, full-time role with no Tyler Conklin.
He was the next guy up. He didn't have hang on, let me get back over. I was flipping over to our losers, the Jaguars.
It's a Buckeye, man. I had to ask.
Yeah, I should have known. I should have known not to switch over yet. But yeah, looking over at Jeremy Ruckert, 67% route participation and 11% target share on his way to 2.2 PPR points.
We will find better options. Give me Grant Calcaterra over Ruckert at this point. So now we can go ahead and move on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Superior performance from Mac Jones, man. He was laughing. He was having a good time out there and actually showing off more scrambling mocks than I think we've seen since his rookie year Pro Bowl where he hit that sweet gritty once upon a time. Man, that is a memory I forgot I still had. But yeah, had a cool spin move out there. But more importantly, Dwayne proved to be capable of existing in those few seconds between getting the snap and getting the football to one Brian Thomas Jr.
Yeah, so we're talking about a game here where we didn't have Evan Ingram. He's also now been shut down for the season with a shoulder injury on IR. 2 weeks ago, we lost.
By the way, Dwayne, I'm sorry, real quick, because we just recorded the injury thing on Friday. Freaking Doug Peterson, man. He told us he was day-to-day on Wednesday, and then he said he was going to be good for the game, and then he's gone on Friday. Pisses me off. Yeah. So I'm sorry, everyone. I know we didn't have it right, but Doug Peterson, man. Sorry.
Yeah, well, we went with the information that we had. But the good news is it did come down early enough that it wasn't like a last second thing on everybody. So at least we had enough notice that I sent Camden, my son, a message that day, that Friday afternoon, to pick up Brenton Strange, which was good. We'll talk about him here in a second. So Brian Thomas Jr., 94% route participation. He's basically all that's left in the Jaguars passing attack. He's already been really good. Well, now they're having to funnel everything through him. A 33% target share today. Ian gave you 32.5 fantasy points, was a good for 30% of the team's air yards, 2.19 yards per route run, despite having to play with Mr. Mac Jones. And like you said, Mac Jones actually looked pretty good today. This version of Mac Jones is what I kind of thought we might get whenever we first got the injury to Trevor Lawrence. And I know a lot of people were down on him, but I just remember those 3 or 4 games that stick in my head where I was like, Mac Jones wasn't bad a few times, for the Patriots. Unfortunately, just been more times bad than not, but it was good to see this. So Brian Thomas Jr., obviously an absolute baller. I agree with your sentiment, Ian, like just vibes and looks, the best rookie wide receiver this year, which is saying a lot because Malik Neighbors is coming out here and earning all these targets. Like clearly we're probably going to be ranking Malik Neighbors ahead of him next year. We'll see what happens with the quarterback situation, everything with the Giants. They're locked right now up in the top. They're going to have a top 2 pick, most likely them and the Raiders. So I'm guessing they're taking a quarterback. We'll see what happens. But man, Brian Thomas Jr., just the way he looks, can beat you deep, can beat you underneath. And today it was more of just feeding him the stuff underneath. If you guys saw it, like he caught a basically a slant route, and just cooked it to the end zone, scored a touchdown. He had another drag route across the back of the end zone where he beat the guy. So, I mean, he's He's doing a lot of good things, Ian. So today he showed that he can do it, not just having to go deep, but he can beat you just in the catch and run department. So really just showing off everything. The only other note here for the passing attack, well, two other quick notes for the passing attack, and then we hit the backfield. 90% route participation for Parker Washington, but obviously was not very involved because it was all really going through Brian Thomas Jr. and Brenton Strange, who was the starter for Evan Ingram. He had an 82% route participation and a 28% target share. Dude had 11 receptions on 12 targets out here today. So not saying that's going to happen every week for Brenton Strange. There's a little bit more of the seesaw variety performances for him earlier in the year when we didn't have Evan Ingram. But now we don't have Gabe Davis. We don't have Christian Kirk. We don't have the other guys that he still had at his disposal, or that the team had at their disposal. So really Brian Thomas Jr. and probably Brenton Strange. I think Brenton Strange is a guy that's going to be like a borderline tight end one now.
Jaguars have the Raiders next week, Dwayne. Brian Thomas, top 15. Can we do it? I want to do it.
Yeah, no, I think we have. I think we have to.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I don't think we have any other choice. He's been balling out, and they don't have anything else. Yeah. So yeah, I think Brian Thomas Jr. is a borderline wide receiver one.
And in Mac Jones's defense, one thing that we should maybe try to, check ourselves with a little more, when we see these backups forced to go in on a short week, a little preparation, and then accordingly not have a great game, maybe cut him a little bit of slack. Because again, it was a bad first debut for Jones, and then just a complete buzzsaw going up to Detroit to play that then a bit healthier Lions defense. And hey, in 2 games since then, he certainly has looked a lot better. So I'm not saying Mac Jones is all of a sudden living up to his, prophecy as a first round savant or anything like that. But hey, maybe he can be an above average backup QB in the NFL. So again, can't say enough good things about Brian Thomas, but we said plenty, so we can go ahead and move on to the backfield, Dwayne, which did seem to once again shift back in favor of Travis Etienne, despite, about 14 weeks of evidence that Tank Bigsby is the better runner.
Go with whichever running back I don't put in the sicko column. 2 weeks ago, I had Etienne. It was fine. He didn't bust, but really Tank had more of the workload. This week, I was like, all right, we're going to go with Tank, and it was Etienne back in the front in the driver's seat. He had a 70% snap share today, 48% of the rushing attempts versus 38% for Tank Bigsby. So, look, man, it comes down to game script. It comes down to the matchups. It comes down to hot hand adjustments that are going on in the game. It's really hard to say who's going to lead this backfield on a week-to-week basis. And honestly, it's not worth it. That even if one of them gets all the carry, it's the freaking Jaguars, man. Like, it's like, what are we trying for? Like, what's the ceiling if we get this right? Well, 12.5 points today. That's what Travis Etienne gave you, 12.5. And if you get it wrong and you guess Tank Bigsby, like me in the sicko start, is 4.2. So the floor is just too low, ceiling not high enough. I'm just done trying to figure it out. I'm not going to pretend that I can because I think there's just too many variables determining who's going to be the lead back each week.
I'm sorry, Dwayne, but it always works out this way. You talk about Brian Robinson's great utilization. He's got the Eagles. We talk about, what's the upside in the Jacksonville offense? Why do we care? They're facing the Raiders next week. So we got to kind of
still can't tell you who's going to. Yeah, but the Jets haven't been that good against the run either. But yes, the Raiders are a better matchup. So yeah, I'm not going to argue with that.
So we'll see. Etienne, Bigsby, living on that flex line. It's definitely going to be one heck of a conversation all off season long, trying to figure out who's going to be the starter. So, hey, I know I did say Bigsby has been the better back here, but honestly, guys, it really is like Jalen Warren last year, where it's not even a slight at Travis Etienne. You pull up any advanced metric you want, and you're going to see Bigsby in the top right quadrant of that graph, man. He really has been a top 5 running back, basically by any single measure. And in Etienne's defense, certainly could have, lingering issues from the shoulder and hamstring injuries that he has been playing through all season long. So that wraps up that game. And Dwayne, before we get into some Texans Dolphins goodness, did want to give a shout out to our friends over at Game Time, because Dwayne, we both know there is nothing like being at a game in person, especially hockey, man. Again, maybe more of a Midwestern Northern thing. I don't know how many ice rinks you guys got down there in Texas, period. But going to those games, man, just again, the vibes, the nonstop action, truly do love me some live hockey. And guys, if I do want to go try to find some tickets, Game Time is my go-to for finding some amazing ones, but not just for sports, concerts, and shows as well. I was actually scrolling through the Game Time app the other day, and I came across this new feature called Game Time Picks, and it is a total game changer. Game Time Picks curates your experience, showing you the best deals on great seats, and they make it so easy that it's truly a no-brainer, people. Seriously, Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying tickets, and you can find out for yourself by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using the code LIFE, L-I-F-E, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, create an account and redeem code LIFE for $20 off. Download Game Time today because what time is it? Game time. Texans took down the Dolphins 20-12. Houston did cover as 2.5-point faves. The under cash at 46. So hand up, Dwain. I kind of ended a podcast calling Derek Stingley a fraud. I think that was the word I used.
I was thinking about that.
Decided to have 2 picks out there. So a lesser man would point out that the first one was a bad throw by Tua, and the second one was probably a drop by Tyreek Hill, but not me. I'm just going to own it. Just going to ignore all the times A.D. Mitchell's roasted him and didn't get a catchable ball earlier this season. Derek Stingley played a great game. Good for him. And yeah, turns out your boy Ian, not always so spot on with the take. So as always, we will watch the film and get better. But for now, just give some, flowers to the Houston Texans. Now sitting at 9-5, Dwain, despite, I don't know, for a single 2-week stretch really playing what we would consider to be, to their ceiling. So win is a win is a win. Nico Collins, 2 touchdowns, but just 17 yards on 4 catches. And I mean, CJ Stroud, only 131 yards, man. I remember back in that Green Bay game earlier this year where he had that dud. And I think that was the first, real bright, glaring warning sign potentially for what was to come. And you brought up the point where it was just shocking to even see Stroud sort of have that lowly performance, being held under 250 yards. And sadly, man, it's a case, whether it's the play calling, the offensive line, just not quite the offensive environment we were hoping it would be this year.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we're at. I mean, even Joe Mixon today, a guy that we've really been able to lean into. Now, he did have a hip drop tackle early in the game where maybe he aggravated, his prior injury. He did gut it out and play the rest of the way, handled 71% of the rushing attempts, but only 10.6 fantasy points for him today. So if you had that bye last week, you got through that, you got into the playoffs, and now you got to put Joe Mixon back in your lineup. Didn't get that much. He really saved you in the check down game. Most of it came on the from reception. So yeah, overall, this is just an offense that, look, it's Nico Collins, man. It's Nico Collins and it's Joe Mixon, and that's really it. We've tried the Tank Dell thing so many times. I mean, we called him a boom bust wide receiver 4. I think that's still kind of where he lives, but we're just not getting the big boom games from CJ Stroud. So obviously Tank Dell's part of that. He's got to do his part to unlock what, Stroud needs to do. So yeah, not worried about Nico Collins, a guy that we're going to all rank in our top 6 wide receivers every week. I think we're going to be ranking Joe Mixon in our top 6 running backs the rest of the way more weeks than not. But outside of that, there's just not really anything you want to, have to do with this offense, including CJ Stroud himself.
And including Dalton Schultz, of course, just 2 catches for 13 scoreless yards. He did get a little bit banged up, so good to see him get back on the field. Don't want to wish injuries on anyone, but yeah, I think we can all agree disappointing season for, I believe, their $36 million extended tight end. So Mixon going to be a tough matchup against the Chiefs next week, Dwain. So, did see Jerome Ford prove today that they certainly can be had by a little bit of explosiveness, but end of the day, 18, 20 plus touches during any given week. I don't know why I said 18 when he only had 17 today, but going to have a good workhorse role that, again, is going to be really tough to get anywhere near that fantasy bench. So Dario Ngumbawale was actually the leading rusher, and that was on a cool fake punt. So good job by the Texans on that one. Only other note I would just point out is Tank Dell does seem healthier. I understand that the booms haven't been coming, but I would be interested, Dwain, seeing how low his ADP kind of gets ahead of 2025, because assuming Stephon Diggs is going to be finding a new employer just based on that 1-year deal and coming off the ACL. So I would be happy to get Tank Dell more so at a discount moving forward, because again, even saw in that 15-yard run today, man, not too many players have that start-stop ability that he has still managed to flash in his first 2 years. Otherwise, really disappointing performance for the Dolphins. An offense, Dwain, that had been humming, man. One of the best passing attacks in the league since Tua had returned was not the case today. 4 turnovers for Tua. I mentioned the interceptions, and honestly, could have had another one. It was a red zone pick that actually wasn't, because the Houston Texans defender dropped it. So sucks to see there. And, kind of tough to see it getting all that much better, especially if Jalen Waddle is going to miss any time with this ankle injury.
Yeah. So, I mean, we saw Tyreek Hill these last few weeks, or actually 4 out of, I think, the last 5 games, he's got a touchdown. Today was a big time dud, 4.6 PPR points. He had an 18% target share. He was out there plenty on the field. Jonnu Smith was the leader in the clubhouse. You mentioned Jalen Waddle injury, so he had 19.8 PPR points today, and with a 28% target share. Honestly, Jonnu's the most dependable piece of this offense outside of HN right now. I mean, if we're going back over the last 6, 7, maybe even 8 games, Jonnu is he's the guy that's been the most dependable. Jalen Waddle had given you some blow up games here and there. Obviously, we got to deal with the injury now. Tyreek Hill, even though he had been scoring more fantasy points, it wasn't like his role had changed or his target share had improved. It was just really, we were getting the big, huge boom games from Tua, and it was bringing, Tyreek Hill's obviously a driver in that, but he was coming along for the ride because he was scoring the touchdowns. So yeah, overall disappointing, I would say though. I mean, it's still Tua. It's one bad game. If we look at it at the last 6 to 7 games, it's still been a really good passing attack for the Dolphins. So hat tip to the Texans, came out and did a nice job against them today. I think we could easily see who are they playing next week, Ian, before I say anything. Easily see them have a big, who is it?
49ers in Miami.
49ers are that's a tough matchup here recently. They've been a lot better. Even though they've been dealing with injuries. We'll see what they look like, though, basically eliminated out of the playoffs. But the Dolphins are one of these teams that have enough weapons that more games than not, we're just not going to worry about it, right? We're just going to say, hey, they've got enough people to beat pretty much any defense out there. It just didn't happen today. So I don't think there's too much we can take away. We'll just have to monitor what's going on with Jalen Waddle.
Good to see Devon Achane once again overcome some less than stellar yards per carry with that sweet receiving upside.
Oh, Malik Washington. I just want to make sure everybody knows, like, Malik Washington is the guy that replaced Jalen Waddle. You and I have talked about hypothetically. He seems like he would be the player to do that, and that is exactly what happened. 72% route participation. Not a really high target share, but 15%. So I mean, he was still involved. Gave you 10.2 fantasy points today. So Malik Washington is the name to remember if you guys are playing those skank leagues. Maybe you suffered an injury, or maybe you have Jalen Waddle on your team. Malik Washington looks like the next man up.
Skankly counter up to 3, Dwain. We are racking it up, man. Let's go. Let's see if we can get double digits here today. But yeah, Malik, again, not someone we're going to completely, fall head over heels for on the waiver wire, but you need that desperate flex. You know who you are out there, could do worse. And someone in an offense that, again, we still do expect to see some good times from. So have that week 17 matchup against Cleveland. God forbid the weather gods help us out a little bit there. Maybe we still get another boom on the way. So otherwise, Dwain, let's move on to some of the late afternoon action. We had the Broncos taking down the Colts 31-13. Shout out to Denver for covering us 4.5-point faves. The over under at 44 push. So really was a, fairly horrible performance from Bo Nix. Wound up rallying towards the end, found his way to 3 touchdowns, but also had 3 interceptions. And at the end of my Shoosh report every week, I go back through every interception and do my best. I'm not a professional quarterback, obviously, but you can usually tell passes that were tipped, a bomb on 3rd and 10, that was an arm punt, trying to put some context behind them. And Dwain, I can pretty confidently say right now, these were all just on Bo Nix, man. Bad stuff. And accordingly, man, there was nothing going on for really anyone in this offense, which, let's face it, just in terms of consistency wise, has been the case more weeks than not this year. At least Courtland Sutton had a sweet double move touchdown there at the end to somewhat salvage the day, because otherwise, man, it really would have been just one dud after another for pretty much everyone involved.
Yeah, I mean, and Sutton was getting his targets. 28% target share today. He ended up with 9, but only caught 3 balls. So a lot of these were not catchable, to your point. Some of these we'll see probably won't even count as targets to him by the time we get the data from PFF and we run everything for the utilization report in the morning. But still, Sutton was getting his opportunities. He did manage to come down with the touchdown late in the game, so you got 12.2 PPR points out of him. Outside of that, really everything business as usual, just a massive rotation of all these other guys, with really Devon Villay being the second guy with a 68% route participation, but not somebody like you're excited about having in fantasy anyway. So just really kind of a stay away. You have Courtland Sutton, you have Bo Nix, fine. You're good with those 2 guys. But the rest of the passing attack, there's nothing really predictable about it. It's all, well, the one thing that's predictable is it's going to be spread out across all these guys, just the same as the backfield. Now, we did have an injury to Jaleel McLaughlin. Do you know if he came back in the game? Because he only had a 25% snap share.
It was a quad, I believe. I'm not sure if he came back.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure either. So, because this game was a late game, so I didn't get a chance to get all the up-to-date data before we started the show. So I'm looking at it live now. But it was Javonte Williams leading the way with 54% of the snaps, but only 25% of the rushing attempts. And you got Audric Estime with another 21%. Jalil finished with 29%, so maybe he came back in the game. Actually, I can look real quick. I can click on his rushing attempts. When was his latest one? 3rd quarter was his last carry, so no touches for Jalil in the 4th quarter, but he did have a touch in the 3rd quarter. So we'll just have to monitor it. But either way, it doesn't matter, man. It's a 3-way split. We don't really want to mess with it. It's Bo Nix, it's Courtland Sutton, or bust if you're talking about the Broncos.
Titans next week and trying to run the ball against those just two behemoths they have, sitting at defensive tackle. Probably not going to be too pretty. So no Jaleel, shoot up Javonte a little bit in the ranks, but nothing too crazy. So yeah, otherwise Adam Troutman caught a touchdown down the seam. Nate the Diet Adkins, their fullback, ended up catching a 15-yard touchdown, had a little bit of yak there, which was good to see. And otherwise, Dwain, another nice, just flash from Marvin Mims. He only had 20 actual yards out there, but had a long punt return to help set up the go-ahead touchdown in the fourth before things really got going away from them. And let's move on to the Colts and talk about why things got going so far away, because man, Colts were up in this game 13-10 going to the fourth quarter. Everything was going fine. They were about to take an even bigger lead. And then Jonathan Taylor put his hat forward for arguably the sheesh of the year, man. Just dropped the ball right before the goal line to give away a 45-yard touchdown. So man, this has happened so much. I understand it feels good to like coolly drop the ball as you're scoring a touchdown.
Yeah, I don't understand how players keep doing it. I don't get it. And it was huge. It changed the whole complexion of the game. Yeah. It massively changed the game. I mean, the Colts, I know we can't sit here and say this for sure, but the Colts really might have won. If Jonathan Taylor, if that score stands, it just changes the complexion, right, of what the Broncos have to do on offense, the way that the Colts get to play them. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. So yeah, I mean, and it was nice too seeing Jonathan Taylor show some of that explosiveness. And his rushing hasn't been terrible the last couple of games, and the utilization's been there, but he hadn't been scoring the touchdowns. So breaking off the long run, kind of getting off the schneid, but no, ends up with 10.1 PPR points because he doesn't get the 6 from that play.
I want to see Bayless or one of these, just talking heads who lives on the hot takes go with the like, hey, does Jonathan Taylor fumble that ball if Joe Flacco was that quarterback? That's the take that we deserve to see out there, Dwain. So obviously horrible stuff. That said, Taylor did not seemingly get benched for it, right? Still very much the workhorse.
Yeah. 69% of the rushing attempts, 67% snap share.
Okay. Going to be facing the Chargers here on Thursday Night Football. So obviously a disappointing performance from Taylor. And again, it really is just showing the difference, I guess. And hard to say, man, ability between him and guys like Saquon. Like, I don't know. I thought JT was kind of in this extra tier of his own coming into the season in terms of just what he could do with a carry relative to more of a league average running back. Like a lot of players, he has been going through some injuries, so maybe worse than we know, but certainly, man, like one of the bigger busts I think we can say of the year so far. Devon Achane. More fantasy points from just receiving. Take out every single carry Achane has got this year, and he still has more fantasy points than
Achane's been just as inefficient as Jonathan Taylor, but he's getting the receptions, and that's why they matter so much.
Just getting fed. So also was not a good game, obviously, for Anthony Richardson. We knew it wasn't going to be great in the matchup against Pat Surtain and company, who, by the way, hope he is healthy, went down a little bit there late. But yeah, I mean, honestly, first drive was pretty great. Had a couple tight window throws on third down, had a 15-yard read option touchdown. Seemed like maybe coming off the bye, Richardson was going to start balling out, but again, few and far between with the good plays after that. 2 interceptions, both of which, again, I would put squarely on him. And yeah, Dwain, so wasn't great from Richardson, but as we know, erratic passer, and he's going to get there, if at all, in fantasy land on the ground. So at least he did score you a touchdown there if he did go to the well. Otherwise, just need to point out that A.D. Mitchell, it was ruled a fumble when they tried to call a throwback pass that ended up being pick six and taken back the way for the Broncos.
That was ruled a fumble?
It was ruled a fumble.
Because it was going backwards?
Yeah, so you lost 2 points instead of 1. Loyal A.D. Mitchell managers.
That was a great call from Hansen as well on the red zone. He said you can't grab your Bonitos like that because he got a penalty on the touchdown celebration. The turn with your back and grab your crotch.
The Marshawn Lynch.
The Marshawn Lynch. Yes.
There we go. So yeah, I mean, 0 catches on 4 targets for Mitchell, 0 catches on 4 targets for Alec Pierce. So Pierce was knocked out with a concussion. So yes, Mitchell.
Ed and I gave you -3 today in PPR.
How do you get to -3? Did you lose another fumble?
I guess it's I don't know. I'm looking right now.
Oh, it's because he has -10 rushing yards.
Oh yeah. He lost yards rushing. Yeah.
Other than that, though, real nice.
It was really good.
Real nice afternoon at the office for Mr.
Had a 20% targets per route run, guys.
Just, man, the Dontavian Wicks comps here cannot overstate it enough for Mitchell. So I still believe, but making it a bit tougher, week by week. So Josh Downs, disappointing game at the office, 32 scoreless yards on 8 targets. So good to see he was drawing them. Michael Pittman, though, did have a team high 9 targets, caught 6 of them for 58 yards. So Dwain, did we at least see, the usual full-time role for Downs coming back off that shoulder injury?
Yep, 86% route participation, 22% target share behind only Michael Pittman, who you mentioned, at a 25% target share and a 98% route participation. But, as we've said many times, just kind of hard to get excited whenever you've got the major quarterback challenges that this team is dealing with. And I mean, they are massive, and you just don't know. Like, you do get good games. And to your point, like, there's been so many games where it's like, man, Anthony Richardson was just like a few steps or like off the fingertips, or even the receiver's fault, a drop from having these much bigger passing games. But it's just like, man, it's a killer trying to figure out when we are going to get a good passing outing from this Colts offense. So yeah, it's just disappointing.
Last thing, Dwayne, does Anthony Richardson look like someone who runs a 4-4-3 to you?
No, not right now.
Yeah. I was thinking about that today, man. Like, he's obviously a really good rusher, but got around the end on the read option, man. But just for someone who just statistically, in terms of relative athletic score, is the most athletic quarterback to ever play in the NFL, man, just kind of surprising.
He's also really big,
yeah,
which makes it hard to look super fast when you're that big.
That's true.
Yeah.
Also could just be a case where maybe he was in combine mode, sitting around 230. Now he's around 255. So either way, we can move on to the game of the day. The Buffalo Bills took down the Lions 48-42. Really wasn't that close. They were up 45-28, had multiple 17-point leads in the second half. But as we know with the Lions, they never quit. And accordingly, Dan Campbell's, Lions came back and made it interesting there. So Bills did win as 2.5-point dogs. Good for them. And they nearly cleared the 55.5-point game total by themselves. So Josh Allen, 362 through the air and 2 touchdowns, another 2 touchdowns on the ground. Sadly, though, his coolest touchdown was nullified, actually pulled off a chest pass to Dalton Kincaid. A holding penalty wiped that one out late. So could have been even bigger. But hey, Dwayne, still looking very much like the overall QB1 in fantasy right now. You want to give it to Lamar, fine, man. But these two are just really in a tier of their own at this point. Unfortunately, this ascension has not come alongside their highly coveted free agency trade partner, Amari Cooper. Dwayne, 0 targets. How's that happen?
Keon Coleman's return, man, really like shook up the whole receiving room. Keon Coleman had a 54% route participation. He only gave us 7.4 fantasy points, but man, he knocked Khalil Shakir, who's been in that 80% plus range for 4 straight games, down to 62%. Mac Hollins, who hadn't been playing a lot, it hurt him a little bit. Dalton Kincaid was also back in the lineup. He was at a 57% route participation, but Amari Cooper down at 41%. Curtis Samuel at 30%. He missed a little bit of the game with an injury. So we have a massive rotation going on with Keon Coleman back. It's I hate to say it, but like we have this elite upside in the passing game due to Josh Allen at quarterback. Man, it is really hard to nail down who you want to use from all of these guys. Now, Khalil Shakir still came through with 15.9 fantasy points, so we would obviously lean to him. Ian, he had a 30% targets per route run today, so that's how he was able to offset not being on the field as much. But man, it's not going to go as perfectly every game. So this return of Keon Coleman as well as Dalton Kincaid is leading to an even larger, split across all of these players, which pushes them all down the ranks. I mean, Amari Cooper, man, 41% route participation and 0 fantasy points. Like, he's a wide receiver 5? Like, we had him as a boom bust wide receiver 4, pushing for wide receiver 3 territory after last week's game. But after this, I mean, you can't have Amari Cooper in your starting lineup. Period.
Bro, and these were 2 games where we actually saw the Rams and the Lions go touchdown for touchdown against them. We get the Patriots next. Josh could throw the ball 20 times in that game.
Yeah. And look, like Ty Johnson was out here going nuts in the passing game today. 5 receptions for 114 yards. I mean, and he was obviously a guy that they planned on doing some matchup stuff. Yeah. Got him on some linebackers that couldn't run the wheel routes and things like that with him. Some little natural pick plays. Nice scheming, But man, like this team, they'll dial up stuff to like players that you're just not expecting. And so when those sort of things are going on, in addition to the playing time, it just makes it super tough for Amari.
Guess how many, do I have the right game? Yeah. Guess how many targets Ty Johnson had, Dwayne, in the game that James Cook missed?
Probably 3.
0.
0. Yeah. He gets nothing in that game. And then in this one, he gets 5. Yeah. What's funny is James Cook could be doing all of this, and he's not. Like he's in a, I mean, it's a little under talked about because the Bills are such a good team and they score so many points. Like James Cook had a good day today. He gave you 26.3 PPR points. I think you had him as your bold call.
Don't ask me who the other one
you
was.
also had him and Terry
Elijah
McLaurin. So you were 2 for 2. I think I went 0 for 2. So you carried us again. James Cook today, 41% of the rushing attempts. Like, I think that's like 4 or 5 games now under the 50% mark. Route participation only 27% because we got Ty Johnson running around out here getting all these targets. So they rotate everyone, man. I mean, the only person who's not rotating are the offensive lineman and Josh Allen. Everyone else is rotating. Dawson Knox had more routes than Dalton Kincaid today.
Again, James Cook not getting the RB1 usage, but getting the RB1 production, man. Buck 05 and 2 tuds on the ground. Also did have 1 catch on a little off-script play for 28 yards. So, yes, Dwayne,
they all scored. Ray
yeah.
Davis scored. Ty Johnson scored. James Cook scored twice.
RB room throwing a party tonight, that's for sure. So, yes, I will pat myself on the back for that bull call. I did not bull call Terry McLaurin, though, Dwayne. I just kind of yelled at you about him. I decided to bull call someone who we had more receiving yards than today. Elijah Moore. Maybe not my best call, but again, don't judge me for my losers.
Let's go back and edit the tape.
Please judge me on my winners. That's all I ask here. Just the opposite of little Wolf of Wall Street there. All right. Yeah, business as usual. Khalil Shakur, Bills really freaking good at football. Great. So the Lions, Dwayne, Jared Goff, 494 yards and 5 touchdowns again. We're just able to go up and down the field, really, in garbage time, but, was able to get it done on a day where, man, Lions could not run the football. And this is such a great example, Dwayne, of how good real-life NFL defense is. Normally, if you do see some of their bad rushing numbers, if they want to, they can have more resources and help fix that problem in a hurry far more easily than they can. Again, get better at defending the pass.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the Lions only get 31 rushing yards from Jahmyr Gibbs, 4 from David Montgomery, but also it was a major game script issue. I mean, the Bills were pouncing on the Lions from the get-go, but we finally saw David Montgomery completely game scripted out. We've not seen this, at least not this year. You'd have to go back to like the middle of last year to find a game like this, and it wasn't this bad. He only gave you 7.5 fantasy points, so it wasn't, it's better than a 0. But only 33% of the rushing attempts, only 31% of the snaps. This was truly in a pass-first scenario. They went all the way to Gibbs. 74% of the snaps, 53% of the rushing attempts. Obviously, the snaps coming because 74% route participation, 28.4 fantasy points for Jahmyr Gibbs today in a losing effort. But, man, he just was not coming off the field with the game script working out the way that it did.
Thank God that this wasn't the game where I, yelled at you about, oh, man, what does David Montgomery need to do?
Yeah, it was 2 weeks ago. I wish it would have been this one.
Would have made me look pretty stupid in that one. So we'll note that this is, again, let's see, it stops a 6-7 week stretch pretty much of Montgomery being an RB2. Next week against the Bears, fully expect. I mean, that's a game that's going to be outdoors where I think they will have to lean on Montgomery in the ground game more than ever. So going back to the well with the Lions running backs, Sonic and Knuckles, and we're feeling good about that. Otherwise, Amon-Ra St. Brown proving that, he still is a very good football player. Caught 14 of 18 targets for a $193 and a touchdown. And also Tim Patrick, Dwayne, caught another touchdown. That's 3 in 2 weeks. Even got some MVP chance afterwards. I love it. Definitely weren't for Jared Goff. Everyone was shouting MVP for Tim Patrick. So I appreciate that. Not so appreciative, though, of Jameson Williams, who, yes, was able to salvage the day with a true late, garbage time touchdown. But did we see him out of the picture for a little bit?
Yeah, he got banged up for a minute. And I think I even saw something about him getting carted to the locker room, but evidently like the cart back was a Lamborghini because he was right back into the game. Jameson, he ended up with a 95% route participation, which was like right there with everyone else, 87% of the snaps. So maybe he missed a couple of snaps blocking on a rushing play because it wasn't adding up to me. So I'm wondering if someone just mistakenly wrote that about Jameson Williams, because I did see something similar to that. So pretty full-time role. To your point, he did just save the day late. And honestly, I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown, like in the first half was like, meh. But the second half in this trailing script, like, man, they just lit Amon-Ra up with 18 targets, 33% target share, 37.3 PPR points. I'm probably going to get knocked out of the guillotine league because Waz got a donut from Cooper Kupp. And he got 10 points out of another one of another really good stud. He was having a really rough, outing. And I think I was projected to outscore him by like 70. He had Mike Evans and Amon-Ra St. Brown this afternoon. And between them, I mean, Amon-Ra gave him 37. Evans was probably close to that. I know we'll get him next. So I think he covered all of that with just these two players. So yeah, I think I'm probably in trouble in the guillotine league, which is down to me, Friedman, Waz, and I'm not saying the other guy because he just brags too much. Thor. What's funny is I wouldn't even trade my team for Thor straight up right now. But yeah, maybe I should change my tune on that because this week Thor definitely scored more fantasy points than me. So hat tip to him. But yes, Amon-Ra St. Brown did have a monster performance. Sam Laporte, look, dude, all these guys scored fantasy points because you just have the Lions
pass attempts.
Yeah. The Lions had to keep throwing. So 18.1 fantasy points for Sam Laporta, but it was the same thing, a 19% target share. That's kind of where he's been at. To your point, Tim Patrick scored a touchdown, so he gave you 13 fantasy points with a 15% target share. So yeah, they were all involved, but mostly it was the Amon-Ra St. Brown show.
Even Dan Skipper caught a touchdown.
Even Dan Skipper, yeah. And the guy's coming to tackle him, and he's like, I'm not going out of bounds. He lowers the shoulder into the tackler. Love to see it.
I wonder how much like practice time the Lions actually spend trying to get their offensive linemen to football. Hey, it works out. Don't get me wrong, but I do wonder because they do it more than any other team combined, man. So good stuff there. Now, guys, we just have 3 more games to get to. But first, a quick word to our friends over at DraftKings. Grab your favorite team's jersey and some snacks and head to the couch for another Sunday of action-packed football. You can get even closer to the action with my partners at DraftKings. And right now, all new DraftKings customers who bet just $5 will get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Just download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and sign up using the promo code FantasyLife. The crown is yours. That's right. New customers get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins after betting just $5. If sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry, you can still join in on all the fun with DraftKings Daily Fantasy and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use the promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. The Eagles took down the Steelers 27-13. Philly covered as 5.5-point faves. Under Dig Cashier at 43. So Jalen Hurts, just when everyone was starting to whisper about this passing game, Dwain really had, I would say, his best performance of the season through the air, particularly when looking at who it was coming up against. So 290 yards and 2 touchdowns on 25 of 32 passing. Also chipped in 45 rushing yards. And of course, had a tush-push touchdown for a good measure. So I think I had a Hurts versus Drake May start-sit question this morning, unironically. So there was some people, getting worried about this offense. Obviously talked about A.J. Brown all week as well. Devonta Smith, someone who, again, wasn't going off. And just a good reminder that all 3 still very much remain good at football. Just not all that often that Saquon Barkley has a dud like he did today.
Yeah, 25 fantasy points for A.J. Brown, 28 for Devonta Smith. So now A.J. Brown did leave the game really late with a lower body injury, so we'll have to keep an eye on that.
He seemed okay. It looked really bad.
Okay?
It looked really bad at first, but he was kind of back in there. He looked okay.
Yeah, and it was one of those where, like, as he was getting hurt, he immediately just, like, fumbled the ball intentionally. Just let go of the ball because, like, it hurt so bad. So we'll see, though. That can also be an adrenaline thing. It looked like it could be. I didn't see what any of the docs said online. I missed that because I was getting ready for the show. So we'll keep an eye on it. But, yeah, the offense consolidated down without Dallas Goedert in a game where they did throw it more because you got a tough matchup against the Steelers. Well, the Steelers have been a tough matchup, really, any way you dice it, but they decided to attack them more through the air today. So, yeah, everybody involved was great. Grant Calcaterra did not do anything, but he was, again, in the tight end, fully replacing Dallas Goedert, at least as far as the routes go, 95% route participation. On Saquon, what I'll say is I thought this was going to be a lot worse. It was it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. Still had 60% of the snaps. I know he missed that series at the end of the second half, but I do think that was probably the 2-minute offense that they've been giving to Kenneth Gainwell anyway. So I think it was just kind of a weird timing situation with when he got hurt, came out of the blue tent, looked fine. He's sitting there with his helmet on the sideline. It was a pretty long drive that Kenneth Gainwell got to go in there for. So still had 19 carries to Kenneth Gainwell's 7. So I don't really think there's anything going on here. We'll see what Saquon looks like if he shows up on the injury report. Just, you got unlucky, man. 9.4 fantasy points. Steelers hat tip to them. They played the run well, and this was just happened to be the worst game for Saquon.
Saquon probably will be on the injury report this week. He said post-game he was, quote, dealing with a little something. He refused to really go much more into it. But, yeah, shout out Kenny Gainwell, and why not, man? I mean, those 2 catches he had where he made all sorts of yak happen, truly an explosive player. I always wonder what they put in that Memphis, wide receiver, running back room water coolers. We do get some freaky athletes coming out of there. Kenny Gainwell, Dwain, again, I had no reason to believe Saquon's going to be missing time, but if you want to go through just some of the handcuffs, and not saying Gainwell will be this top 10 player, player, but his availability is a lot, just more open, I think, to even the skank leagues out there than a lot of the other Trey Bensons and Blake Corums of the world. So if you do have that extra roster spot, Kenny Gainwell could be spending worse money on there, because even if you don't need him, Lord knows that everyone else will be going after him if something happened to Saquon. But yeah, otherwise just good to see Philly in a game where they had to throw the football a little bit, make some good things happen. So they'll be taking on the Commanders in Washington next week. Maybe another game where their hand is a bit forced, but kind of doubt it. Over with the Steelers, Dwayne, 20 minutes time of possession, just 163 total yards. Yeah, this Eagles defense is really freaking good.
Yeah. I mean, the running game was completely shut down, and they just gave up on it. On a game where you didn't have George Pickens, they were just like, screw it. You only had 6 carries for Najee Harris and 4 for Jaylen Warren and 2 for Cordarrelle Patterson. Now, Russ did pitch in with 4 carries. That might be a season high for him, actually. 2 of them were scrambles. So, yeah, he did have 2 design runs. Yeah, he hasn't had many of those. So, the run game was definitely not there. As far as the pass catchers go, it was still really more of a muddled room. Calvin Austin, though, did step to the forefront with a 92% route participation. So in the last game, not having George Pickens, we really saw him still limited to that slot role, but they decided to keep him on the field all the time. He didn't really reward you with that much. I mean, 11.5 fantasy points. Most of you probably didn't have him anywhere near your starting lineup, but he had a 24% target share. So just a name to remember if we have a situation where George Pickens and that injury does continue to linger. Maybe the team's going to be willing to give Calvin Austin a little bit more playing time. Pat Freiermuth did lead the team, Ian, with a 29% target share. He gave you 11.2 fantasy points. To your point, just a rough day overall. We talked about Russ being one of these guys that more often than not lately, we've talked about him as an upgrade, but without George Pickens and in this tough matchup, he was one of our big downgrades for the week at quarterback. And obviously that's what ended up happening, and that hurt all of these pass catchers. But behind these guys I just mentioned, it was pretty muddled.
Ravens next week, one of those Saturday games. I understand Russ didn't put up the numbers we were hoping for last time out here, but hey, objectively a good plus matchup there for the receivers. Hopefully George Pickens able to get back, but man, really wouldn't call it a given. So have a hard time thinking, Dwayne, even in a good matchup, we're going to be having Calvin Austin inside the top 30 or anything like that.
Be a skank league, Ian.
Skank league play, get that counter up. Got to be a 6 or 7 by now. But yeah, Calvin Austin, again, in the wide receiver 4 territory, I can live with that. So only other shout out would just be to Darnell Washington, who basically pulled a blindside and tried to throw Darius Slay into the stands while finishing off his block. I can see why Arthur Smith, Tomlin, and all the Steelers like him. I just still don't know why this dude doesn't move his position to offensive tackle. Pretty much what they tell him to do anyway. I mean, go play for the Lions, bro, and do it both, but just get paid as the tackle, man. You're missing out there at tight end. So yeah, Steelers, hopefully better days ahead. Get your popcorn ready for that matchup with the Ravens. 2 more, everybody. Cardinals took down the Patriots 30-17. The Cardinals did cover as 6-point faves. The over cashed here at 46.5. So efficient game from Kyler Murray, Dwayne. He also got banged up for a little bit, but returned, which is good to see. Unfortunately, still had 0 passing touchdowns and only 11 rushing yards. So hey, they're going to get the Panthers next week, and I would like to think that's going to be the game that gets Kyler out of this rut. But man, really disappointing second half.
Yeah, I mean, Kyler's just been a little bit he's been a disappointment period, for this year, but we had kind of seen the passing yardage get up over the last few games, but then like we weren't getting the scrambles or the rushing yardage. Well, in this game you got neither. You didn't get either of those things. You didn't get a big passing game, you didn't get the passing touchdowns, and you didn't get the utilization on the ground. So yeah, real dud here. 10.1 fantasy points from Kyler. As far as the rest of the team, though, man, not really anything to hit on here. James Conner was in his typical role. Trey McBride out here giving you all these scoreless yards. They tried to design a play just to get the man a receiving touchdown. Looked like something they probably worked on all week. Even the broadcast team was on it. You could tell they were just sitting there waiting to talk about it. It happens. It was actually a great play by the middle linebacker for the Patriots, Caden Ellis, which I may get the Ellis brothers wrong because one of them's in Atlanta, one of them's in New England. They're both linebackers, but he stood him up, right there until reinforcements got there. So just a good play by the Patriots defense. But I thought Trey McBride was going to get his receiving touchdown on that one. Still gave you 17.1 PPR points. Could you imagine this guy if he is scoring touchdowns again?
Oh my God.
This guy would be scoring 23 fantasy points, per game. So Trey McBride looking awesome, 32% target share. Marvin Harrison, his kind of up and down season just continues along. 19% target share, 5.2 PPR points. Greg Dortch made some big plays, but the playing time didn't expand. He also had a fumble through the back of the end zone, so that was not one of his good plays. Did that not count?
No, he fumbled it to his teammate who scored in the end zone.
Oh yeah. The offensive lineman got it and was in by
Yeah.
just a smidge. It was
All part
originally,
of the
you're right.
plan.
You're right. They came back and called it a touchdown to the
Yeah.
lineman. Yeah. Williams. Yep. All right. So yeah, that's it though. Nothing else to say. Everybody else in their normal roles, but it's all about Trey McBride and James Conner.
Trying to slander my man Dortch. All part of the plan out there, man.
I tried to sneak it in.
Did just want to give shout outs. James Conner, 2 touchdowns, 138 total yards. Really was a beast out there. Really been a beast for most of this season, man. Shout out HOU-MIA. Right now, tied for the league high in broken tackles at 81. So tied with Josh Jacobs, who presumably will be taking that, solo spot up there here shortly. But really has been a great performance from James Conner. Knock on wood, he can continue to finish off this fantasy-friendly stretch. Again, Panthers next week. Get ready for a top 8 James Conner ranking perhaps in that one. And then Trey McBride, 9 catches, 87 yards, continuing to look like one of the very best tight ends in all of football. And with that Marvin Harrison Jr. dud, will note he had 2 slot fades. That man, the first one looked like it was in his grasp. It kind of made me question, what is a drop when the defender gets a hand in there? Because Christian Gonzalez did make a great play on the ball, but really did seem to be catchable on that one. So I will cut Kyler some slack there and had another close call as well. So we'll see what happened with Marv. I know he has busted relative to first and second round fantasy expectations, relative to normal rookie wide receivers, so he's still been more good than not. So we'll see in 2025 and beyond. Otherwise, Dwain, with the Patriots, just another fun game from Drake May, man. Again, didn't go out there and get the win or anything like that, but kept him a little competitive there at the end. Completed 19 of 23 for 202 yards, had a touchdown on a cool little just flip after he had extended the play, and then also ran him for a touchdown later. So, my God, man, let's say T. Higgins signs there. Let's say Travis Hunter gets drafted in the top 3 and wants to play wide receiver full time. We get some offensive linemen from somewhere. I understand there are more issues we need to solve here, but man, Dwain, if we can get Drake May surrounded by an actually good supporting cast, dude, ceiling is the absolute moon for this kid in fantasy.
Yeah, he needs it because no one else here is doing anything right now. I mean, I will say Kayshon Boutte is playing all the routes, but it just never translates into anything. 3.9 PPR points today. He had a 22% target share, which was the best on the team. So, I mean, look, again, complete skank league. Ian, you add the counter up. I mean, maybe Boutte is a guy, but nothing here, man. I mean, obviously Hunter Henry's kind of done his thing all year. There's just there's nothing else to add here. Ramondre Stevenson's the running back 1. Antonio Gibson, we have seen him reestablish himself more as the running back 2 here down the stretch. We saw that continue today. But man, you don't want any of these guys anywhere near your fantasy lineup that are on the Patriots.
Especially not next week in Buffalo. I mean, I'd be surprised if the Patriots aren't at least 2 touchdown underdogs in that one. So hopefully Drake May continues to give us a few fun moments at a minimum. Again, has at least been a pleasure watching him go through some of the rookies' ups and downs. So let's move on to our last game here. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers beating down the Chargers 40-17, now improving to 8-6 on the season, on a bit of a run here with Baker Mayfield and company taking charge. 4 touchdowns through the air for Baker, including 288 yards. Also, Scooten, man, only had 25 rushing yards. He must have had a couple runs nullified out there as well, because, man, gets in the open field. And I think Baker's always had, such irrational, I don't want to say irrational confidence, probably a lot rational. I mean, this guy's obviously, achieved more than 99% of other humans out there, but running in particular, I just feel like he thinks of himself as someone that can get away a bit more often than he probably can. It worked out for him today, though. And it also worked out when he kept on going to Mike Evans, had that interception that was intended for Evans earlier. Seemed like he was forcing it, but kept on doing it. And lo and behold, 9 catches, 150.
And that was a good play by the corner. That looked like cover 2 where the cornerback, or there was a cover 3 cloud, something like that, where the corner sitting down under, and then once he sees that he's not going to read, his first read underneath, he started drifting back and made up a ton of ground. Honestly, I could see a lot of quarterbacks getting fooled on that one, because I saw that one when it happened.
Fair enough point there. But yeah, fair enough point that I think Mike Evans is getting to 1,000 yards, Dwain. It seems inevitable. He's at 749 on the season. He needs to average 83.7 yards per game the rest of the way. So gonna have the Cowboys next week. I mean, I'm looking at us right now. Hat tip to us, Dwain. We had Mike Evans, both wide receiver 6, highest of our consensus rankers. And yeah, he certainly came through in a big way. But also Jalen McMillan came through again. 5 catches, 75 yards, and a touchdown. Yes, the touchdown was a wide open slot fade where it looked like maybe even OPI should have been called on the pick, but had some other good plays out there, man, where he did show more of an ability to separate. And I think your point last week is probably the biggest one here. who cares if he's getting wide open, man? It's a brilliantly designed offense that we know is going to score a lot of points. And accordingly, man, Jalen McMillan maybe creeping in the wide receiver 4 territory.
Yeah, look, a young player. He's a rookie. We know rookies often come on late in the season. He battled an injury earlier in the year. Baker Mayfield having a career year. This is one of our favorite offenses to be a part of. I mean, so I'm like, hey, give me a young player with a chance. So yeah, Jalen McMillan, needs to be rostered in most leagues. So, I mean, I know some of you guys are playing in the 18 leagues. You only get to have 12 or 13 players on your roster. You might not have Jalen McMillan in those, but your 10 teamers, your 12 teamers, he should be rostered. He was free quite a bit last week. And a lot of people, obviously not out there picking anybody up because like you guys that are still listening, they're not in the playoffs like you are. So yeah, McMillan is a guy, Ian, that, and again, just a nice way to close out the year for a young player. Give us a little bit of a hope for what he could look like next year. Now we'll see what goes on here with Chris Godwin, but yeah, the Bucks, you're just happy to have any of the pieces. Sterling Shepard didn't do much today. Now I know he was battling an injury through the week, still had his playing time, 70% route participation, but was kind of the forgotten guy. K. Dotton once again was the forgotten guy with only 4.4 PPR points, only a 12% target share. So, we're going on a 4-week stretch now of K. Dotton, putting up multiple duds. In the running back room, Ian, really split between Bucky Irving as well as Rachaad White. They were the primary guys. 39% of the rushing attempts to each one of them. They both had 15. Slight snap share lead to Rachaad White. He played a little bit more on passing downs. Remember, folks, Bucky Irving dealing with the hip and back injury all through the week, but did get healthy enough to play and looked freaking fantastic, man. Another, game where he's just posting these big plays, 117 rushing yards, 7.8 yards per carry for Bucky Irving. He just continues to look tremendous, man. Every time he's out there. I would love to see this guy, and we've seen it actually. We've already seen one game where he just completely got fed and he went absolutely bananas, but didn't look like the injury was bothering him at all to me.
No. 54-yard run, I think, was definitely the highlight of the day. Got caught there at the end. Maybe doesn't have the craziest long speed in the world, but man, this dude can make you miss in a phone booth. No doubt about that. So Rachaad White's still doing his thing. I'm okay with the idea that Rachaad White, a bit better option if you want to run between the tackles and just maybe stick to what the coaches are planning a bit more of a crazy leg, mindset too. I think Bucky Irving's running style, but hey, been more effective. But again, to White's credit, did catch another touchdown as well and continuing to put up plenty of fantasy points in his own right. So moving on to the Chargers. Yeah, Dwain, again, we talked about it this week. Justin Herbert thought he was going to be really banged up coming in, and that was the case here. Yeah. Took 3 sacks, took a long time getting up from several of them. 0 rush attempts out there. Ended up getting pulled in the fourth quarter with the game out of reach. So Chargers next week going to be going to take on the Broncos. Short week. That sucks. Thursday night. And at this point, man, people that we can actually really trust, it's Ladd McConkey and, to be fair, lesser extent though, Quentin Johnston.
Yeah, but even that,
not against the Broncos.
If we have Justin Herbert, we've got the short week. We're still worried about the injury. Obviously they played it smart at the end of this game. He still threw two touchdowns a day, and he was almost to 200 yards. So, had he played the whole thing, he might have still ended up with a more respectable fantasy game. Who knows? Maybe he gets one more passing touchdown and another 50 yards. But I have a hard time believing that we're going to have Herbert higher than like 17, 18 in our ranks. And I think some people might have him lower than that. So anytime you have that is, a little bit of a concern, for the passing game. Ladd McConkey, less so, Ian, just because we've seen it every week now. He had a 22% target share today, gave you 16.8 PPR points. They move him around a little bit more. Quentin Johnston, he came out and he led the team with targets with 10 today, 31% target share. So he gave you 15.5 PPR points. Just not sure, though. Like, he's still super boom busty, right? 73% route participation, actually played less than Josh Palmer, even though he played better than Josh Palmer today. So, I'm down with you on McConkey. Quentin Johnston, boom bust wide receiver 4. But I'm going to I'll be a bit worried. We'll see what happens with Patrick Surtain. He got injured at the end of that game. If the Broncos didn't have Surtain, I might feel a little bit different about it.
We'll say this was one of Quentin's few touchdowns this year that wasn't the result of some horrific broken coverage. Yeah, he caught a little curl and got going and put his head down, picked up some extra yards, with the yak. So that really has been the one consistent skill that we even saw him flash. And remember, still is a very, very young wide receiver. So not ruling out his potential to get better. Made some really tough catches last Sunday night against the Chiefs. I know we didn't get a chance to fully talk about that game, but he has been, coming back, making some plays. And we wouldn't have been surprised after his rookie season, Dwain, if he was just out of the league. That's how bad it was, for stretches. So maybe not fully out of the league, but we've seen it, man. The John Rosses, the Jalen Ragers of the world, like it doesn't take more than a bad season sometimes for these guys to completely lose their footing. The fact that QJ is pretty much locked in as the number 2 pass catcher in a passing game that's been good for most of the season, I think we can say is, pretty promising for him. So would not be happy if he's still their number 2 next year. Let's go ahead and add someone here. T. Higgins. Can I just, start putting him into every single offense as we go through a show like this? Tune in and we'll find out. But yeah, man, otherwise, last question would just be still kind of the same old rushing attack. I think J.K. Dobbins could be back next week. Let me double check.
I think he has one more week that he's got to miss on IR. We'll have to go back and check for sure. But man, Gus Edwards, 8 rushing attempts for 23 yards? Yeah, 23 yards.
Not great.
And they're not giving Kamani Vidal anything else. They're just kind of like, he's been right around that 30% mark, but it seems like they want to continue to let Gus be the guy to lead the charge. There hasn't been much of a charge to lead. The rushing attack's been pretty pathetic without J.K. Dobbins. So yeah, it's hard to trust any of that. So yeah, nothing. Oh, Stone Smart. I did want to mention him real quick.
We're not done. Stone Smart season. Let's go.
Didn't mean to miss Stone Smart because Will Dissly was out of this one. We'll see what happens with Dissly on the injury report this week. But Stone Smart did lead the way with a 65% route participation, 25% targets per route run, and up with a 19% target share, 8 fantasy points. So he did step into the role that Will Dissly vacated.
Good stuff there, man. I love our Reddit community and stuff. Was happy to go on AMA this week, but like the amount of Stone Smart start-sit questions I got
a lot of them too.
My God, man. I was just terrified this dude was going to go for like 110 yards and a touchdown. And, it was the process. I wasn't that worked up about that. But yeah, told a lot of people not to start Stone Smart. And if he did, he didn't exactly kill you. 5 catches, 50 yards out there. But yeah, it was a situation where, man, this dude, picked up quite the following here in just 1 week of action. So, guys, that is going to do it, though, for Dwain and myself ahead of now week 16, those semifinals. So, hopefully, all this for you, you just took in as you're, sipping some Chardonnay or whatever, chilling on your first round bye. Certainly, that was a lot better, than trying to deal with this madness going on. So, good job by you. Good job by you, Dwain, as always. We'll be back Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday together once again. But I invite you guys to also check out myself, Paul Charchian, and Chris Allen holding down the fort here. And, like 12 short hours or something like that. So I'm going to go eat my Sunday night sushi, drink my Sunday night wine, and have an otherwise, good rest of the evening. I hope you do the same, Mr. McFarland. So for Dwain, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy